If you want to see me talk about 26 eyeshadow palettes, then this is the tag for you. Hi there, it's Hélène, and I am doing a tag video, but this is kind of a hybrid tag video. This new spin on the tag was developed by Jen Phelps, and she suggested doing an A to Z or A to Z of brand names for your eyeshadow palettes. Or actually I think it was makeup overall, but I think with a focus on eyeshadow palettes. And then Alejandra Lisette, I hope I am saying your name right. Alex is also what she goes by. Decided to take it one step further and only do it with eyeshadow palettes. And I thought that was a fantastic idea. So this is my A to Z of eyeshadow palettes tag. So I have all my eyeshadow palettes ready to go in alphabetical order, and I hope you really enjoy going through these. I'll tell you why I picked them. Now, of course, in some cases I only had one palette name that started with a given letter of the alphabet, but sometimes I had a number of options, and I can tell you why I particularly like that given palette that I pulled out. My first one. This is the Certify Affinity palette, and I picked it, of course, because the name Affinity is a given, but also because a friend of mine decided to get this for me in our makeup swap. This was Steph who got this one for me, and it just meant a lot. I love the color story, and for it to be the first one of the bunch is great. Plus, one thing for matte lovers is this palette is all mattes, and I think the color story is fantastic, and it predates by a long shot the Jaclyn Hill Volume 2 palette. This is the nice condensed version of what she came out with this past year. So I really like this Certify Affinity palette. Next, I have to bring up an Urban Decay palette for letter B, and that is the Born to Run palette. I like so much about this palette. I love the packaging. It's super sturdy. It has a good weight to it. It has a very generous mirror and a very generous number of shadows at 21. And also, look at this. It folds completely back, and I do love palettes that can do that. I am very much enjoying the color story. I find that each column gives you a look without really having to look throughout the palettes to decide what you want to do. Now, I do hop around in any given palette, but the fact that there is a look in each one of these columns it's nice. If I don't want to work on it too much, then this is a nice palette to use, and definitely one that I would consider for travel just because of how robust it is. The concept was really good for that palette, and so was the execution. Now, one other palette, I like the color story, but I have a few issues with it, is the Classical Paradise from Ace Beauté. I have a lot of indie in here, and you will see that I did something to the palette. Let me just take the plastic out here. I ended up using white nail polish to cancel out some of the red. The red was really preventing me, the red background was really preventing me from seeing the shadows the way I want to be able to see them. And so I just used white nail polish and let it dry considerably so that I could have a better view of what the shadows really look like. I don't understand why a brand doesn't just stick to white or black as a background for eyeshadows. Any kind of vivid color really distorts what the shadows look like. But that said, what I love about this palette is I am a big fan of reds and I'm a big fan of yellows. So I think it's a no-brainer to know why it is that I like this palette. And the eyeshadow pans are very generous, which is also quite nice. And it's very, very sleek. We are now at the letter D, and I would be silly, I think, just because of the hype, not to choose this palette at this point. And it is the Divine Rose 2 or Mothership 8 from Pat McGrath. Let me just open it up for you. And I did do a swatches video on this one. If you want to see it, I'll put it right there. And this is what it looks like. And it has this shadow, which is that, I think that's the one, yeah. That is that trichrome, I think that Pat McGrath is calling it. But anyway, this is the second version of Divine Rose. There was a Divine Rose 1, this is number 2. And I think Divine Rose 1 was Mothership 7, and this is Mothership 8. And for me, the packaging on this one, just like the packaging for the Mothership 5, I really love the design. The illustration is just beautiful. And I'll be a party pooper. I have talked about it when I opened up the palette the first time. The packaging was torn in all 4 sides, inside and out, and so there's a gap as well of about a ½ inch inside for the palette, so the palette moves around. So just letting you know about that, that for some reason this packaging is can be messed up, and that can be really annoying and affect the way that we feel about the palette itself. It's certainly affecting the way I think of the palette. But let's stay on the positive for now, and we will just say that it is a gorgeous, gorgeous outer packaging. For letter E, it had to be this one. It absolutely had to be the Electric from Urban Decay. It is such a gorgeous palette, and I think that the OG is much nicer than the Wired palette that came out this year, and I have zero intention of probably ever getting rid of this palette. I love how sturdy the packaging is. I love the colors inside, and I also love the brush. And it's the same brush that came out in the Jean-Michel Basquiat colorful palette from, of course, Urban Decay again. This brush is fantastic for precise application of color. It's fantastic. For the letter F, I am going to go with another Urban Decay palette, and that is the Urban Decay Full Spectrum palette. This palette brings me so much joy because it is indeed the full spectrum. It is a bunch of shadows, 21 shadows in total, of so many different hues. So when I am trying to get some color inspiration, this is a very easy one for me to reach for. Even if I don't use it, I love to just look at it. This one and the Electric palette tend to be my color inspiration palettes. I appreciate having this one in my collection a whole lot, even down to the logo itself. The next palette is for the letter G, and that is the Glitter Storm from Ciate, and it's mostly because of the packaging. I mean, let's be real. It brings out the kid in me, and I just love it. Even though when we look on the inside, it's not that crazy wild of a palette. It's quite basic, but you know that you're going to come out with a flattering look each time. So I don't mind at all having this one in my collection, and do find that it is pretty sturdy packaging, even though it was brought to my attention that it is pretty flimsy on the inside. I still really like it, and of course, with it having a purple and a red, that's right in my wheelhouse, as you can tell by this look. By the way, if you want to see how I came up with this look, I will link it right here. So we did the letter G, we are now to H, and H is this palette. And it is the Stila Happy Hour. Now the funny thing is that I didn't realize the name of this palette was Happy Hour, and it's all kind of drink related, but it was just the color story that got me. And I think it's so neat. I don't have that many cool palettes, meaning cool toned, and this just does it for me. It just addresses that wish that I had to have more of a cool tone palette, and I love it. It's very luxe, it's heavy, it's gorgeous. I love the simplicity, but the elegance of the palette itself. I'm a big fan of this packaging from Stila. And every time I've done a look with this, if I haven't said what I have on my eyes, I get questions. So yeah, I really enjoy this palette. And another palette that's relatively unique in my collection for the letter I is the Infinity palette by Linda Hallberg, or Hallberg, depending on how you say it. And it is a very sleek cardboard palette, just like all of her other cardboard palettes. They tend to be sleek, at least the 8-pan ones. There's a mirror, there's a nice message on the plastic that I will not throw away. And this one it's called the Infinity palette because it serves as an eyeshadow palette and as a face palette all in one. And I think the name Infinity is perfect. And there is a light version and a deep version. And I ended up just liking the first one so much, I did end up getting both the light and the deep for both skin tones, because I just found that the deep palette was of interest to me for eyeshadow just as much as complexion products. Now on to the letter J, and as soon as I think J, I think this Just Peachy palette, and it is an all matte palette. I am partial to mattes, and this is actually a palette that I am thinking of panning next year just because it's so easy to pair these types of mattes with other shadows to create some really nice looks. And I do really like the packaging. It is magnetic closure, even though it looks like it's got a clasp. It's really held together mostly by the magnet, and it's just a perfect size. It's like it makes me think of the old-fashioned cigarette cases from way back when in the old movies. I don't know, it just has that feel to me. And it also has a really nice peach smell to it, which makes me feel like a kid, that's all. So I really quite like this Just Peachy palette. Now, what could I possibly have for K? It would be the Fenty Beauty Killawatt palette. And I keep it in the box because I prefer the look of the box. But the palette itself is octagonal. And I've done quite a few looks with this one, mostly using it for eyeshadow and also for blush more than highlighter. And here is what the palette looks like. It's on ridiculous discount right now, and I do recommend it. And there is a large mirror as well. I enjoy these two as blush and most of them as eyeshadow, with a few of them that I also use as highlighter on the cheeks. It's a neat concept. It was well executed, and at the price right now, it's just a few dollars per highlighter. It's really a great deal right now. And yeah, I recommend it per the video I offered on it. If I have some specific videos for each one of these palettes, I will link them in the description box because I won't be able to put cards for everything, obviously, with 26 eyeshadow palettes. But yeah, I like this one. We are now at the letter L, and for that one I chose La Vie en Rose by Pat McGrath. And I picked this one because of the fact that it is just the beautiful hot pink and accompanying, did I just gouge? Yeah. I got my nail in one of the shadows, of course. But anyway, this is a really great color story. You can tell where my nail went. I really enjoy this color story. It's very fetching, and golden purple and pink, just they really go together. And this one looks very blue in the viewfinder. Don't know what it's looking like for you, but it's kind of a purple that shifts blue and back and forth. And on the eye, it's a very pretty, impactful and pretty shadow. So that plus pink or kind of a mauve color and gold, I'm in heaven. And as you can tell, I like purple eyeshadows and bluish purple and pink. So this palette obviously is quite nice for me. And La Vie en Rose, of course, is such a nice name for it as well, that it's just a complete package. For M, I actually picked a palette that I have not used yet, but there's a story to it, and this is the Mercury Retrograde. And this palette I had poo-pooed because I don't really want anything from Huda Beauty. And then Kara C showcased it on her channel and made it look so gosh darned interesting that I ended up picking it up when it went on sale during the Canada Day sale at Sephora. And so the stars aligned, and it's called Mercury Retrograde. Get where I'm going? This is kind of a special palette. To me, it's just like all the stars aligned for me to get this palette. And no, I am not into zodiac stuff of any kind. It's the second palette only that I have from Huda Beauty. And the only other one I have is a 9-pan coral palette. And I'm just really curious about this color story. I don't really have anything like this. The closest I have to this color story is that Happy Hour palette I showed you from Stila. And so I'm looking forward to swatching this and starting to do some looks. Of course, that purple right in the middle there is of interest to me. I do know that I'm going to love these two up here. And then the rest of the palette is just a big mystery to me. So we will see what I end up doing with it. But just how it came to be in my collection, I just found it was like a set of dominoes. One thing had to happen after the other for it to end up in my collection. And it did, and so here it is. And now we are at N, and it does feel like it should be the ultimate N, and it is the Ultimate Naked Basics palette from Urban Decay. This is a very, very nice basic neutrals palette by Urban Decay. And when I'm kind of stuck and I just feel like I'm missing a shadow, I'll just go into this one, and chances are between it and the Naked Basics palette, I do tend to find that perfect shadow to complement a look that's, for some reason, I was just not finding it in any other way. And I do like this, this brush. I like the very, very tiny end, similar to the electric palette, and the fluffy end. I find it works very nice, very nicely, and can be used on its own to create a look. Plus, the packaging itself is absolutely beautiful, as is, frankly, the Mercury Retrograde. I mean, there's a reason why they did clear packaging. The palette itself is so, so nice. Now for O, I decided to take a palette that I have not touched yet, similar to the Mercury Retrograde, but it's special to me because it's part of the first ever order I placed with Beauty Bay. And it's for a brand called Zoeva, and this is an offline palette. That's the name of the palette, and it has a sleeve. And the reason I'm so excited about this palette is, first off, I get to try Zoeva, but I'm also a very, very big fan of the Matrix, and offline plus that kind of a green matrixy look on the palette, it just spoke to me in so many ways. And I'll show you the inside of the palette. I have not used it yet. It's in that handful of palettes I haven't used, but I am very much looking forward to using it. The only thing I've done so far is ended up, I think I opened it this way. I don't think I actually did that, but there's a little gouge in one of the shadows. But I'm really, really interested in using it, and I even like the name, the shadow names. It definitely is Matrix related. The first one is Ring, Ring, Ring. The next one, No Connection, Pause, Unavailable, 404, Contact, Human After All, Pacifea, I'm not sure what that is, On, Off, and Interpersonal. It just, I don't know. For somebody who's kind of into tech, it's a palette that I geek out on, and I just like it. I just like it. I just hope I like the shadows too, but the concept itself, I really like it. And it seems so different from other palettes from Zoeva. I'm just going to say that. It just felt so different, but it was the one I was most attracted to, and so it ended up in my collection. Speaking of unique palettes, for letter P, I did choose Pastel Goth from KVD Beauty. And the reason for picking this one is twofold. It is a colorful palette, but it's also pastel. So P for Pastel Goth, and of course pastel itself being the nature of the palette. I really like this palette. I like the fact that there's a gray and a white, and it's almost like they're soft neon colors, if I may. So the yellow and the blue feels like they are kind of on the side of neon, and sort of with these two. I don't know, there's just something very different about the color story of this one compared to regular pastels or rainbow palettes. And I think it's very unique. And the palette itself is embossed, the lettering is embossed, and I just really like it. I like everything about it. The shape, the color story, and the outside packaging. It's just really nice. And I don't see myself ever getting rid of this palette, to be quite frank. For the letter Q, I chose the Queen palette by Juvia's Place. It's really a Fumi X Juvia's Place collab. And it just felt right. I mean, there is the Queen of Hearts at the top, and it is a hybrid palette that is meant for face and eyes. And I don't know, it just felt like the perfect palette to choose for the letter Q. And I was very intrigued by this palette. I had a chance to use this palette as part of a focus on certain palettes in the palette roulette, and I'm glad I did. That purple and red in there, whew, very interesting shadows. For letter R, I decided to go with the theme of this palette, which is the Tarteist Remix. And it was an attempt by Tarte to get into some pretty colorful eyeshadows, and I wanted to definitely support that, and I decided to get this palette. And it is a number of very colorful shadows for Tarte, and the one I always think of when I open up this palette is this yellow. It is very, very yellow. It's kind of a yellow and gold combined. It's almost like a fool's gold color. And so whenever I think of the Remix palette, that particular shadow comes to mind. It has the same signature smell of the Tarte palettes, and the layout is really weird. They reused a palette base, and I wish they had maintained some sort of an order with what they did with this palette. But there is no question that, to me, I consider this one as a companion palette to the Tarteist Pro. And it does give me that punch of color that I like to have. And another one that's really neat is this nice shifty lilac-y purple that is so popular as well for looks these days. So I'm happy to have it, and I'm happy that it's so different. And it also used that changing cover that has become kind of popular with a number of makeup palettes these days. So I just thought it was different, and that it merited being in this alphabetical countdown, so to speak. Now this one I just used recently in a look, and I will definitely put it right here, and it is the Safari Raine palette. I almost did not get this one. I did manage to nab it when they chose to bring it back, Colored Raine that is. And I am so glad I did. It means a lot to me because I did go on a safari in 2014. And I thought, oh, it's so gimmicky, I'm only getting it because I went on safari. But it's brought back really nice memories in using it and thinking about the safari. And maybe I should do a whole video on that. I did ask in that video, I'll ask again today. If you want to hear about the safari and see some pictures, please let me know. I can maybe do a get ready with me and talk about it and show some pictures. But here is the palette. And you can see why I wanted to include it. The look I did yesterday was with these three and then these two as liners, and it turned out so beautifully. And I also did swatches for that palette. So the first impressions and the swatches I will definitely have linked below. For the letter T, I absolutely had to go with the original Tarteist Pro from Tarte. Not only the brand name, but the palette name. It's just so good. It's just so good. And the fact that you can go from left to right and have 4 basically put together curated looks for yourself, I think is fantastic. Whether you are really comfortable with eyeshadows or whether you're a novice, this palette will work for everybody. And you can use it for travel, of course. It has a huge mirror. It lays nicely on some sort of a platform for you to be able to see what you're doing. I really think that this is an iconic palette for Tarte, and that they did such a good job in planning and executing this palette, both for the packaging, the contents, and the layout. They just did such a good job. And I know it's long in the tooth, but I would be surprised that folks are decluttering this one. I think that it's just a no-brainer, and it was so well thought out that it merits a place in our makeup collection. For letter U, I'm going to go with the Ultra Foil from Jouer. And the reason I wanted to include this palette is because it's so unique. I will go into this palette just like I will go into the Make Believe in Yourself from Tarte to pick an inner to 2/3 of the lid shadow. So I decide what kind of base makeup I want, and then for my punch, I will come into this palette once in a while for brow bone, but for most of it is for that inner to 2/3 of the lid. And I think you can see why I would go in here. There are some just unique shadows. I don't even know which one to pick. I'll go for lime green because that's kind of my jam. It's a minty lime green, and it just looks so good on the inner to 2/3 of the lid. It's just so nice. This one is a softer option out of that palette. And it just adds that little bit of interest to your eye look. This one makes it easy. If I don't know what it is that I want, just put some neutrals on your eye, open that up and pick a color, and you're good to go. Now, when I want to play, this is a fantastic palette, and it is the Colored Raine Vivids palette. And here is what it looks like. Those are all the individual Vivids shadows. And the purple row, everybody would know I'd be into that. If you watch this channel, I'm into purples, as you can tell, as I've mentioned already probably 3 or 4 times in this video. But also this yellow is to die for. It's fantastic. And so this one, they're all depotted into this magnetic palette. But there was also a Vivids palette that looks exactly the same with the pans securely in the palette. I think that Colored Raine just hit it out of the park with these 16 mattes. They're just so good that if I want a vivid color, and I know I'm going to be using a matte, this palette comes to mind automatically. And that's why it's my choice for the letter V. Now for the letter W, I am going to go with the Warrior palette from Juvia's Place. It is such a unique color story that I find it inspiring. And I loved playing with these blues down here, and I'm not huge on blue eyeshadow. This purple is bomb. Of course, this pairing is fantastic. This one I haven't really done yet, but I do love to have a yellow in a palette, and really most of the colors work really well together. And it's really interesting to me that these two down here in the palette, I almost use every single time I do a look, especially this kind of silvery blue. It's just so nice to transform other colors. So it's a palette that surprises, and I would invite anyone who's just not quite sure what to do with it to do at least 3 looks before dismissing the palette as not being able to kind of figure it out, and also doing swatches on your hand, layering things up and seeing how they all work together, I would say is highly recommended. But this is a playground. This is a shadow playground. It's just so neat, and just like so many of Juvia's Place palettes, they're really well curated, and we will always come up with looks that we never ever thought we would put together for an eye look by using Juvia's Place shadows. So I think it's super well done, and I frankly could have picked any one of the colorful Juvia's Place palettes for at least a slot in this alphabet. It's just such a good brand. So I'm glad to have featured at least 2 in this countdown. Now, finding a palette starting with the letter X would be very odd. So I decided to go with Ecstasy from Pat McGrath, and it is a set of 5 eyeshadows. So it's technically EC, but from a sound perspective, it sounds like an X. So Ecstasy, and these are, I've got it upside down. Let me just do this. This is, as I jam, it's 3 times now I jam my fingers in one of the shadows. And I think I would use this palette very much as I do the Ultrafoil palette from Jouer. And that is that at least these 3 colors, I could see as accent colors. And these 2 I can use mostly as a base, with this one being the obvious one. But I could see myself going in to get a purple using such as a Synthetica, or if I want a blue, a Lapis Luxury. I could just see myself going for that punch of color. And of course, the gold standard is a no-brainer. But it's just that very easy, few choices punch of color. I think that this is a great palette to have, and for a very small, compact option for colorful shadows. And I actually think it's a pretty good sturdy packaging for having it out and about. It might very well be a colorful palette that I would take with me if I'm going to be gone for a couple of weeks. And you just never know when you want that punch of color, maybe to go out for dinner, dancing, or something like that, and you want to take a neutral look and amp it up. I think this is a nice little palette to help us do that. Now for the letter Y, I went with a different take on a palette, and that is I went with this one because it is a build your own palette. So I decided this is my your own palette. Now this one is, I just wanted to show you what the shadows came in. But I don't really care for the packaging, but this is what they would normally be housed in. That's how they came to me from ColourPop. And let me show you what they look like in the magnetic palette that I prefer to use. And the 12 shadows, this is actually a different palette. This is the Semi-Precious from I think 3 holidays ago. And down here, these 12 are 12 shadows that I chose from ColourPop. And you can tell my love of greens and yellows and purples in here, as well as reds. I just wanted to pick 12 individual shadows from ColourPop that would really speak to me specifically, and I think I chose some decent shadows, and I also wanted to make sure that they were complementary to the 8 that I already had. And I think I did an okay job. So your own palette for the letter Y. And so we only have one last palette to talk about. And I'm trying to finish with a bang. And it is the Zulu palette by Juvia's Place. And I really like the name because I was really intrigued by Shaka Zulu some time ago, and there were some documentaries I watched on it. There was a show even on it. And I was, of course, that was a dramatized version of Shaka Zulu. But I don't know, I was very interested in it when I was a kid/teenager. And so to have a Zulu palette from this brand, I thought was really interesting. So I liked the concept, and then I saw the color story and I was like, Look at the gorgeous colors. And for a woman who loves yellow, lime green, and purple, I keep talking about those colors on this channel, it has everything my heart desires. And it does make me think, it gives me vibes of Sugar Pill. And that was really one thing that I was curious about with this palette. And I also felt like some of the palette could also be used for face products, namely this one could be used maybe as a blush. It's just a neat palette, and the looks I've done with it, I've been really happy with. The ones I had trouble with, the only ones I had trouble with were more the aqua colors, but they're not colors I tend to go for. But the rest of the palette just really, really intrigues me, and I've done a number of looks with this palette. I think it's neat. And this green that has some good tackiness to it is just gorgeous. And of course, it's right in the middle of the palette, which absolutely captures my attention. I can't help but show you that green. It's just so beautiful. So that's it. We made it. 26 palettes going from A to Z, based on the name of the palette as opposed to the brand. And I want to thank Alex, or Alejandra, for the idea of going for the palette name as opposed to the brand name. It led me to do some pretty heavy-duty head scratching, both to narrow it down if I had multiple palettes that started with the same letter, and also to do some head scratching when I didn't have an obvious choice for a palette for a given letter. So it was fun on many different levels, and so I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Do you have some favorites out of what I pulled out of my collection? And would you have some alternatives for the letter A to Z? Let me know. I would love to hear some of your favorites in your collection. And if you have a YouTube channel, I tag you to do this A to Z challenge. I think it's a neat tag, and I hope as many people as possible go ahead and do it. You can also use the comments section to give me your A to Z if you are so inclined. And with that, I will say thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it every single time, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. But for now, take care.